get into this story. If you enjoy deep NBA breakdowns and the kind of basketball stories that reveal what's really happening behind the scenes, make sure you're subscribed to Ball IQ Zone, because what's unfolding right now in Golden State might be one of the strangest situations we've seen all season. Something unusual is happening around the Warriors. At first, it sounded like a simple injury update, but the more details that came out, the more confusing the entire situation became. And now fans are starting to ask a serious question. What exactly is going on with Kristaps Porzingis? It all started when Warriors head coach Steve Kerr spoke during a local radio interview. Kerr was discussing the recent trade that sent Jonathan Kuminga away and brought Kristaps Porzingis into the organization. Naturally, the topic quickly shifted to Porzingis' health, because throughout his career, injuries and illnesses have followed him like a shadow. Kerr tried to clear up the rumors. According to him, after the trade, he personally reached out to Atlanta's general manager to verify the reports circulating online about Porzingis suffering from a condition called POTS. Kerr explained that he asked directly whether the story was real, and the response he received was simple: it wasn't. For a moment, that seemed like the end of the speculation. Fans assumed the confusion came from misinformation spreading across social media. But then the situation took a strange turn. Just one day later, Kerr completely changed his tone. When reporters asked about Porzingis again, Kerr admitted that the player was sick and would be unavailable. Then he openly acknowledged that he probably shouldn't have spoken about the medical situation at all. According to him, discussing a condition he wasn't qualified to explain had been a mistake. And suddenly, the entire situation became even more confusing. Because while Golden State was dealing with uncertainty around Porzingis' health, the player they had traded away was exploding somewhere else. In Atlanta, Kuminga was playing some of the best basketball of his young career. The 23-year-old former lottery pick was flying up the court, attacking defenders, throwing down highlight dunks, and showing the kind of raw athleticism that had originally made him such a valuable prospect. Every new highlight made Warriors fans a little more uncomfortable with the trade. The reason is simple. Golden State moved a young, high-upside player in his early 20s for a 30-year-old veteran whose availability has been extremely limited. In fact, over the last several weeks, Porzingis had barely been on the floor. In the previous 20 games, he had logged only 17 total minutes of action. That's less than a single minute per game. For a player earning superstar-level money, that number raises serious concerns. And that's where things become even stranger. Because the real question is no longer just about the trade itself. The bigger question is why the Warriors appear uncertain about the exact medical situation surrounding their own player. If you go back to reports published shortly after Porzingis left Boston and arrived in Atlanta last year, the explanation seemed very clear. Medical staff had reportedly identified the issue as postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, commonly known as POTS. The condition affects the autonomic nervous system and can cause a dramatic increase in heart rate when standing. For athletes, it can lead to intense fatigue, dizziness, and difficulty maintaining physical stamina during activity. In other words, the exact kind of symptoms that could explain why a 7-foot NBA player suddenly struggles to stay on the court. But now, months later, the narrative appears completely different. A coach publicly says the condition isn't real. Another report suggests doctors are still trying to understand what's happening. Meanwhile, the player himself remains unavailable while the team waits for answers. That leaves only a few possible explanations. Either the information being shared publicly is incomplete, or something inside this situation simply isn't adding up. And when a franchise like Golden State, led by stars like Stephen Curry and Jimmy Butler, suddenly has a massive contract sitting on the bench with no clear timeline, people start paying attention. Because if this uncertainty continues, the Warriors could find themselves dealing with one of the most puzzling roster decisions in recent memory. And believe it or not, the story gets even stranger from here. And the situation becomes even more complicated when you look at the rest of the Warriors roster. Right now, the highest paid player consistently on the floor besides the stars is Draymond Green. But instead of stabilizing the team, many fans believe his minutes are creating even more problems. The Warriors have struggled to find rhythm offensively, Spacing has been inconsistent, and every possession seems to feel heavier than it should. If you were intentionally trying to lose games, this might actually be a perfect formula. Imagine a roster where massive contracts are sitting on the bench, key players are constantly unavailable, and the lineup on the court struggles to maintain consistency. That's not exactly the blueprint for winning basketball. But here's the confusing part. If Golden State already knew that Jimmy Butler might not be fully available, and they also knew that Stephen Curry wasn't at 100% physically, why make this trade in the first place? Why bring in Kristaps Porzingis under those circumstances? Even if someone wanted to argue that the Warriors are secretly trying to position themselves for a better draft pick, that theory doesn't fully make sense either. In today's NBA, teams sitting in the middle of the standings don't really tank effectively. The most likely outcome is simply landing in the play-in tournament. So if that's the case, why not just develop the young talent already on the roster? Why not give Jonathan Kuminga the full opportunity to grow inside the system? Unless the Warriors truly believed something else. Maybe they believed the medical concerns surrounding Porzingis were exaggerated. Maybe they believed the illness that had been reported publicly wasn't as serious as people thought. Or maybe they believed something that many teams convince themselves of every single year, that they could be the organization that finally unlocks a player's full potential. NBA history is full of teams telling themselves this exact story. For example, the Los Angeles Lakers once convinced themselves they could fix the long-standing questions around DeAndre Ayton. The logic was simple. Maybe things didn't work out with previous teams, but this environment would be different. This time it will work. It's a belief every front office wants to have, and maybe the Warriors thought the same thing about Porzingis. Maybe they believed that all the injuries, all the illness concerns, all the missed games throughout his career were just unfortunate circumstances, and that once he arrived in Golden State, everything would finally stabilize. Because the truth is, when Porzingis actually plays, he's still incredibly effective. Even now, he remains one of the most unique players in the league. At 7 feet tall, he stretches the floor with elite shooting ability. Defenses have to respect him far beyond the three-point line. That spacing alone creates enormous opportunities for a player like Stephen Curry, whose entire offensive game thrives when the defense is forced to spread out. But that's only part of his impact. Porzingis is also a legitimate rim protector. His size and timing allow him to alter shots and control the paint defensively. On offense, he can score in the post, attack mismatches, and punish smaller defenders. That rare combination of size, skill, and shooting is exactly why people have called him a unicorn for most of his career. And even during the limited moments he has actually been on the court this season, flashes of that talent are still visible. In extremely small sample sizes, his numbers remain impressive. When he's able to play, he's producing around 17 points per game, grabbing rebounds, blocking shots, and creating spacing that few players in the league can replicate. From a pure basketball perspective, the theoretical fit is perfect. A floor-stretching 7-footer next to Stephen Curry could be devastating for opposing defenses. Add Jimmy Butler's ability to attack the rim and draw attention, and suddenly the offensive possibilities become incredibly dangerous. On paper, the trio makes sense. But basketball isn't played on paper, and the biggest problem remains the same one that has followed Porzingis for years: availability. Because none of those strengths matter if the player simply isn't on the floor. And that brings us back to the most confusing part of this entire story. No one seems to have a clear explanation for what exactly is happening with his health. If the reported condition truly is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, commonly known as POTS, then the symptoms can be extremely difficult for athletes to manage. In fact, Porzingis himself described the experience during the offseason in a way that sounded genuinely alarming. He said the illness hit him like a truck. Breathing became difficult. His body didn't respond the way it normally did. Even though he tried everything possible to recover and prepare physically, he admitted that his engine simply wasn't operating the way he needed it to. For a professional athlete, that's a terrifying situation. And we're not talking about just any sport. The NBA demands 82 regular season games. constant travel across the country, intense physical conditioning, and the ability to perform at the highest level multiple nights every single week. For someone dealing with a condition that can cause fatigue, dizziness, and irregular heart rate responses, that schedule becomes incredibly challenging, especially for a player of Porzingis' size. 7-foot athletes already place enormous stress on their bodies just by competing in the league. Add a complicated medical condition on top of that, and suddenly the challenge becomes even greater. So from a human perspective, it's easy to understand why he might struggle to play every game. What's harder to understand is the lack of clarity surrounding the situation. Is the illness exactly what was reported before? Was there a miscommunication somewhere between the medical staff and the coaching staff? Did the Warriors receive different information during the trade process? Or is the public simply not seeing the full picture? Right now, it almost feels like everyone involved has a slightly different version of the story. And that uncertainty is exactly why fans are starting to question what's really happening behind the scenes. Because the Warriors didn't just make a small roster move, they invested major resources into this decision. Meanwhile, the player they traded away, Jonathan Kuminga, is thriving in his new environment. Game after game, he's attacking the rim, creating highlights, and reminding everyone why he was once viewed as a potential future star. Watching that development unfold somewhere else only makes the Warriors' decision feel even more complicated. And yet, there was one reason some people inside the organization still believed the situation could eventually turn around. One name. The Warriors' longtime director of sports medicine, Rick Celebrini. Celebrini is widely respected across the NBA as one of the best performance specialists in professional sports. Over the years, he has helped guide players through complicated recoveries and physical setbacks that once looked career-threatening. He played a key role in helping athletes regain their conditioning and confidence after serious injuries. So naturally, there was hope that if anyone could finally figure out the Porzingis situation, it would be him. But so far, the results haven't been encouraging. Several games into Porzingis' tenure with the Warriors, the total amount of time he has actually spent on the court remains shockingly small. Minutes, not games. And while Golden State waits for answers, Jonathan Kuminga continues to shine elsewhere, which leaves Warriors fans asking a simple but uncomfortable question. Did the team make a brilliant long-term gamble or a massive mistake? Because until Porzingis actually returns to the floor consistently, that question isn't going away anytime soon.